Carriers who plan to innovate are planning for the future. Carriers who are not may not have a future. And there's more to this story. As an industry, and we may have talked about this, as an industry, we're risk averse, and people probably are tired of hearing it, but it really is the truth. And it just is our first instinct to be careful and slow, maybe methodical. And it's not like everybody in our businesses loves process for the sake of process, but we are careful and cautious. We have a long vision also. So our mental daily activity breakdown isn't, quickly, let's try or let's do. It's about, okay, what's happening in 5 years? What's happening in 35 years? So we just don't have that inclination. And I think that some of the carriers that I've been with prior to coming to RGA, when we force ourselves and push those boundaries a little bit, we are very well rewarded. But it's hard to make those pushes, and you have to very consciously drive that from the top usually. Some of the larger carriers where I've worked or that I've seen bring experts in from the outside sometimes who don't have the history of the large carrier or medium-sized carrier experience, and they're definitely pushier, and they can definitely instill some urgency and make persuasive arguments to help you move a little bit faster. So you want some fresh blood usually, and some faces that come from other places, and they're looking at things with a different perspective, and maybe they're bringing more pure customer experience than anything. So they just keep focusing on that because they don't have the legacy of the corporate insurance experience and that mentality. But it really does have to come from the top. I think that the leadership has to decide that we are going to push ourselves. And while it is true that the largest carriers have the most to lose, usually the large carriers are spending time trying to improve their operations. And because systems and processes are slow and encumbered, because you have regulatory challenges, I can speak to North America, for example, you're just so encumbered and burdened by these challenges, but you can't ignore them. So you're always aware and always checking them. And you are usually working hard to continue to improve those things and make your current processes more efficient. And there just isn't sometimes enough time in the day to add this innovative, creative push. In the largest of carriers, usually separating a dedicated team to be able to start to think about it and force the conversation a little more is helpful. And they have the resources to be able to do that. So cordoning off a small dedicated focus for it maybe helps the rest of the organization eventually, learn more about it, and then they start to infiltrate. But it's just hard to get away from your core big businesses that you really need to be careful and manage, day to day very well. The mid-sized carrier tends to have a little more focus, and they tend to prioritize very well and say, we can't really do 20 things. We need to focus on 10. And those are our 10 core things. And there may be a focus on certain markets or certain lines of business, and they exclude everything else. And if they're careful about those priorities, they already have a more manageable plate. And because they're a mid-sized carrier, they may not have as many homegrown systems that they're working with. They may have partnered already and have some experience with that. They may be more comfortable because they just can't build everything themselves. So they're more comfortable in certain, functional areas where they've used third parties a lot more. And those third parties often bring us fresh ideas. And you have to pay attention to some of them after a while. It's good and bad. The small company has less bureaucracy for reviewing and deciding on whether to move forward with a new idea or project, or even a small IT request, for example, something operational or an HR request or something. So a small company should have an easier time getting stakeholders to the table, discussing and thinking through things, and then deciding yes or no. But they don't have the dollars maybe to put behind some of these potential investment opportunities that bring the innovation, and they don't have extra bodies around usually. But what happens in my experience is the small carrier could, if they're careful and they build a trusting relationship with a disruptive entity. It could be a startup that's got a certain number of years under their belt. It could be a division of a behemoth like a Google or an Amazon where they dedicate certain folks to different verticals. So if they act like a smaller startup, but there's bigger assets and resources behind it, if a small carrier can build those relationships and truly at least dedicate somebody to managing and partnering, they can help get that innovation inside and they can bring the focus. The one other side to it, though, is again, they have to focus like a mid-sized carrier. They really need to focus on what their segments are and what their markets are, because they have to stay true to their targets probably before branching out too much, just because they don't have the bandwidth to handle too many different, new things.